This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. I started the last podcast with bad news. This time I start with good news. It's morning again in Michigan. It's morning again in America. If you woke up today with the sun shining and the birds chirping, those are the sights and sounds of hope. There will be a future. By popular demand, Donald Trump will return to the White House. Here's just a few things you need to know about what just happened, what will happen, and what it all means for our governor, Gretchen Whitmer. So I've warned for months now that the gatekeepers were failing. It's been a consistent theme since we started in July. I said that every time they pulled a lever of influence, say by turning the Trump-Harris debate into a 3-on-1 encounter, it misfired. And every time they told us what to think, like Joe Biden is stable and sane, or Kamala Harris is serious and prosecutorial, it backfired. None of the tools Democrats and the media used to fortify the 2020 election worked this time around. In August, I wrote an Enjoyer column called Kamala Harris Fears the Light. I knew that Harris did not have the chops to win the presidency, but it was still an open question back then whether the media could pull her across. Win or lose, I knew the 2024 election needed to be the end of the Democrat media alliance. Some people, when they partner up, only bring out the worst in each other. Under Democrat rule, the media became fat and fake happy, something between Tim Walz and a pop commercial. A media that excels at its watchdog role could still be useful as a lapdog in a truly divided country. But as Harris governed as if America were a one-party state, and Democrats turned their swords on anyone who was not a Democrat, the media became less useful. There was just one problem. Democrats didn't have a one-party state yet. From the second Harris was installed as the Democrat nominee, the media stood ready to light her path to the Oval Office. Kamala Harris, remember, hails from California, the ultimate one-party state. She was a new arrival in Washington. She only got there in 2019. So, in the water that Harris is native to, a Democrat doesn't need the media's help in California to be helped by the media. She thought the same thing would hold true in 2024 in Washington, and to an extent she was right. The Fourth Estate really did try its best to help Harris. The problem is, they can only work with what they're given. Harris was too empty to sit for interviews. She's too boring to command large audiences. There is no such thing as Kamala Harris. Try as it did to tell us that the emperor's pantsuits were stunning and brave, the media ran into a brick wall called reality. Abraham Lincoln could have warned of this day, and in fact he did. He warned us all that psyops and scams and BS of whatever form all have a half-life. Lincoln said you could fool some of the people all the time. You can fool all of the people some of the time. But you cannot fool all the people all the time. To put this in terms even a Democrat could understand, you guys just called Trump literally Hitler and then lost the popular vote to literally Hitler. In the words of another famous New Yorker, we don't believe you. You need more people. Here's what I wrote in August. All the Yas Queen's horses and all the Yas Queen's men can't put the Kamala Harris candidacy back together again. The gatekeepers are failing. They'll mount one last stand and they might even win. But right now, they're losing, and they know it. Well, they lost. The gatekeepers are not just failing, they have failed. Back then, Kamala Harris had just refused a sit-down interview with Time magazine, but they gave her the cover story anyway. What I would have done if my owner said, we have to have a cover story, maybe he didn't tell me what kind of cover story, and maybe the story we would have told is of a woman who's trying to be leader of the free world who fears the access to one of the best magazines in the world. Rather than tell that story and force Kamala Harris into the public square, they published a story that tried to paint her as some kind of historic figure, a pink Obama whose time has come. Maybe she's working too hard to sit for an interview. Harris's lesson of the Time magazine cover reaffirmed a bad habit she built in California. If the media is just going to help you anyway, why even bother to take the interview? And so getting the cover after denying the interview only affirmed a tactic. By the last week of the election, Harris did the same thing. She refused an appearance on the Joe Rogan podcast. You know what Rogan did? Did he get an AI version of Kamala Harris's voice and do the podcast anyway and ask her softball questions? No, that's what someone at the New York Times or CNN might have done. What Rogan did is instead is he had J.D. Vance on the show and he endorsed Donald Trump. Denying the Rogan interview backfired in Harris's face, and by then there was no amount of cover from her friends in the mainstream media that would help her. Name one reporter right now who matters, quite frankly, and name one institution, New York Times, CNN. I mean, let's just throw out the biggest names out there that matters as much as Joe Rogan, as much as Tucker Carlson. So the individual creator has a lot more power right now, which is why Trump gave them all time. And by giving these little chits of access to people, you build loyalty. It goes two ways. Everyone in podcasting got a rise off Donald Trump appearing on the show, while Donald Trump got to reach people who wouldn't just sit around and watch a Trump rally. Trump is an acquired taste, but you have to have a chance to acquire the taste. Those interviews were a lot of people's inroad into Trump. And so the Democrat Media Alliance, I liken them, they're like a couple that hooks up and they get fat on the couch together. They can be their laziest, worst selves together. When they are able to have sex, it's uniformly short and sloppy. When that sex produces a child, that child is aborted. And then after years in the sack together, they declare a joint bankruptcy. November 5th was that joint bankruptcy for the Democrat Media Alliance. If Democrats were smart, 2024 would mark the end of a 60-year run of calling every Republican who stands in their way literally Hitler. From Barry Goldwater in 1964 to Trump in 2024, it's been 60 years of Hitler for the Democrats. It's a bit much already. Harris and her running mate Tim Walz both turned 60 this year. So to put that in perspective, the entire lifespan of the Democrat ticket in 2024, their party's been dehumanizing the opposition by calling them literally Hitler, or a fascist, by which they mean figuratively Hitler. When you lose the popular vote to Hitler, though, as Democrats just did, you have one of two choices. You can do what Democrats did after the 2004 election, where they lost the popular vote and George Bush was reelected, and you can double down. Or you can figure out, hey, what happened exactly where we lost 20 million voters between 2020 and 2024 and figure out how to make that ground. After losing in 2004, Democrats found a champion in Barack Obama, who made himself a star that year with a speech at the Democratic Convention. And in that champion, Obama, they found a figure who was more than eager to divide America along the lines of race, sexuality, trans, any division, any group, any subdivision that could be made. He did it. The more, the better. The smaller, the better. The more balkanized and atomized, the better. Perhaps you'll sell him as the great uniter. And perhaps when he's elected, he'll start dividing the country from the second he's elected. America thought in 2008 that we finally, for lack of a better word, taken the monkey off our back, the monkey of racism off our back by electing Barack Obama. Instead, our politics and our news coverage became ever more obsessed with race and more eager to claim racism than ever before. But because there was so little actual racism to contend with anymore, they started panning for microaggressions. Nothing stuck. For years, nothing stuck. The word was just used and abused and nothing stuck. Then in 2014, a man named Mike Brown, 18-year-old black man, was killed in Ferguson, Missouri in a struggle with the cop. Black men are the bulk of murder victims and the bulk of the prison system. We're overrepresented among victims and criminals, which tells me that we are dead last. We're in a position that no other demographic group in America would ever envy. And out of Mike Brown's death, a movement named Black Lives Matter was born. But it was an odd movement. They said that Black Lives Matter. They even called their group that. But when you dug in, they were talking about dismantling the nuclear family. Explain to me, like I'm a 5-year-old child, how not having a father around would have helped Mike Brown. Obviously, it did not. If police brutality was a concern, putting black female lesbians and black gay men out front was an odd way to address it, no? People hated Obama in 2009 when he called for a beer summit at the White House. There was a Harvard professor, Professor Gates, I forget his first name. He was trying to get into his home in Cambridge, Massachusetts. A cop sees him there, mistakes him, arrests him, detains him, and of course it becomes a national news story because why wouldn't it, right? Essentially, it was a mix-up that became a national headline, and Obama tosses gasoline on the fire. He says the cop behaved stupidly, and then he calls the two men to the White House. The beer summit was silly, we can all admit, but it was actually the right idea. The idea that if we touch and agree, we can come to some kind of accord. We can see each other as human beings again. So today I'm filming this on Thursday after the election. Today I call this Baby Picture Day. It's October 7th. It's Baby Picture Day, and if you hop on my Twitter, down I-75, you'll see a picture of me as a baby. I'm doing the same thing I'm doing now. I'm holding up a cap. It was actually a MAGA hat that was made back in 1984, if you can believe it, and holding a book. In another picture, I'm kissing my little sister, and I have a pencil in my hand. I guess some things never change. But the idea of Baby Picture Day is that we needed to reconnect after the election as a common family, as a human family, and understand that I might not like your politics, but I know that you're a child of God, too. I know that you're a child of parents. I know that if anything happened to either one of us, the people who love us would be devastated. And we'd go on each other's Facebook pages and we'd lament that the time we lost with our fake political divisions. But by then it'd be too late. So yeah, the idea of reconnecting with each other, connecting as human beings, I get it. And the beer summit, I mean, Jesus' first miracle, people forget, Jesus' first miracle was keeping the wine flowing at a wedding. He didn't really want to do it, but his mom wanted him to do it, and we all do what our mothers want us to do, don't we? That we are neighbors, that we can sit down in men and drink a beer and speak as men is the right instinct. Black Lives Matter never did that. They never did the obvious thing, which is to put the white cop and the black teen in the same room where they could hear and see each other. Because if they did see each other, the first thing they'd notice is the common humanity between them. The black kid's mom, behind every black kid is a mom who wants their kid to return home safe. And behind every white cop is a wife who wants that man to return home safe. So between the cop, his wife, the teen, and his mom, we have four people who see that interaction the exact same way. And everybody wants the exact same thing out of that traffic stop, that everybody makes it home alive. But if you do that and you have those dialogues and men connect as men and realize that maybe we're not so different after all, because cops and criminals tend to come from the same social class, there's not a lot of people who go through the Harvard School of Criminal Justice. Let's just put it that way. It's a blue-collar career. Who are you arresting? Other guys who are not, maybe don't have a ton of options in life. You're the same guy, really. But if you did that, if you did have those dialogues and men connected as men, there wouldn't be any need to raise millions of dollars. And if you didn't raise millions of dollars, the lesbians who run the organization can't buy million-dollar homes in white neighborhoods where there are no Mike Browns. The division that gripped and grips our country is big business for some people, and it was great business for the Washington Post. The Post actually won a Pulitzer Prize compiling a database of instances where the cops kill people during the arrest. Forget that a similar project at the Post had also won a Pulitzer about 15 years prior. The Post's efforts for reinventing the wheel were granted journalism's highest honor. Good stuff, guys. But just like that, people who hadn't read an actual word of the work, because if they had, they'd know that there was not and is not and never was an epidemic of cops killing unarmed black men or any type of person. Without reading a page of the work, people were brainwashed into believing that every traffic stop was a life and death encounter. In Grand Rapids, a young man moved to America from the Congo in 2014. For Patrick Leolia's entire life in Michigan, he was subject to the hysteria, to the hysterical belief that anything could happen at a traffic stop. What else could he think? So when Leolia was pulled over in Grand Rapids in April 2022, he was nervous. He fled his vehicle. He fought with the officer, who fought back and shot and killed him. You could say, I could make the argument that Black Lives Matter caused the death of Patrick Leolia by working him up into a frenzy that resulted in him leaving the car and getting shot and getting killed. Sometimes in life, we're so afraid of messing up that we mess up. And just like they tell you on day one of driving school, where you look is where you go. So if you think every interaction with a cop is a potential life and death encounter, you might be inclined to act that way. It triggers a fight or flight response that was never appropriate. Because when you've been made hysterical, there's no room for perspective. If Leolia had listened closely to those same Black Lives Matter activists, he noticed they also talk a lot, all the time, about America's large prison population. He would have put two and two together. We can't very well have prisons full of black men, can we, if they're all being killed during their arrest? Perspective could have saved the guy's life. And perspective is what Democrats and the media lack most right now, and it's actually what they steal from their readers. When their first failsafe, literally Hitler, didn't work, Democrats pivoted back to another standby: abortion. I'm told that if you say abortion 3 times in a row, abortionists will actually appear on your front porch and ring the doorbell. Democrats made a lot of headway in Michigan in 2022 by putting limitless abortion on the ballot. They won, and Gretchen Whitmer won re-election easily. Then Democrats became victims of their own success. Whitmer was elevated after the win to co-chair the Biden campaign, and she pushed Democrats to replicate her success in Michigan. But nobody was smart enough or thoughtful enough to account for the law of diminishing returns. Let's put this in terms that Coach Tim Walz could understand. There's no perfect play in football, but if there is, it's the Philly special. But you can't start at your own 1-yard line, run a bunch of Philly specials, and just march down the field. That's what you'd have to be able to do if it were a perfect play, and that's why there's not a perfect play. Because the element of surprise is always one of your best tools. And so by going to the old standbys of literally Hitler, by screeching abortion, the Democrats did the equivalent of running the Philly special 10 straight times. Football doesn't work like that. Life doesn't work like that. Politics doesn't work like that. Eventually, the novelty wears off. You can't fool all the people all the time. In Michigan, we got a second piece of good news. 2 of them, actually. First, I'm proud to inform you that our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, is now a lame duck after Republicans took back control of the Michigan House. And it's firm control. It's not a vote or 2. It's like 6 or 7. Judging by Whitmer's history with Republicans, though, she was able to get 1,000 laws signed in her first term, negotiating with a Republican House and a Republican Senate. And so I get the instinct to be dubious that just winning the House will matter much. If Republicans didn't stop Whitmer last time, why would they stop her this time? Well, that's why next week we're going to be hearing from Matt Hall. The current House Republican leader is set to become Michigan's next House Speaker. By all accounts, this will be a new-look Michigan House, perhaps not as eager to roll over for the Whitmer agenda as Republicans were in the past. These last 2 years in Lansing, where Democrats held every gavel and crowed about it, left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. What used to be a smile that you saw from your colleague disappeared. It was replaced by a snarl, the snarl of absolute power. And that snarl won't soon be forgotten. I wrote the Whitmer lame duck story for the New York Post, where I covered Michigan as a swing state in the 2024 election. The response was massive. Here's just a few of the responses to the New York Post's tweet about this. So obviously, when these kind of things happen, I post a story, but when it goes to the New York Post's main account, that's always really cool. So here's some of the things people have said. An added bonus of the election: she is literally one of the worst politicians and people in the country. May God have mercy on her soul, because America's fresh out. Another one: President Trump winning Michigan is great, Michigan retaking the House is icing on the cake. It's a big middle finger to Gretchen Whitmer's Marxist agenda. Another calls Whitmer one of the most vicious creatures on earth. Tammy Bruce at Fox News says, "I'm not tired of winning yet, are you?" Tammy, no, I'm not. Another person says, "Next time, don't play with communion and Catholics, you Doritos, delusional, disaster." The number of those remarks, the intensity of those remarks, tells me there's a pent-up anti-Whitmer sentiment brewing in the bellies in Michigan. In 2022, the first time voters got another look at Whitmer after the pandemic, it never found a proper voice. The Republican who most Republicans were excited about, James Craig, never made it onto the ballot. He was victim of a signature forgery scandal, and now those scammers have legal problems. But by the time the fraud was uncovered, the damage was done and Craig was off the ballot. Craig, a former Detroit police chief, Craig could have been the candidate to unite the entire Republican Party behind him. He no doubt would have picked up some substantial number of votes in Detroit, which would be lights out for any Democrat who wants to win Michigan. James Craig could have won that race. And in Craig, Republicans had a candidate they believed could beat Whitmer. And that candidate was taken away, and that was demoralizing. There's more than one way to steal an election, and one of them is by having the candidate people are looking forward to run into ballot collection issues and never make the ballot in the first place. What happened in Michigan in 2022 is closer to voter suppression than a legitimate election. Tudor Dixon's brave. Tudor Dixon's gorgeous. Tudor Dixon is a fighter. But she wasn't the candidate Republicans wanted if everybody had made the ballot. I know that. She knows that. She did the best she could in an impossible situation. But it should have been Craig versus Whitmer. Between that and the general state of disarray within Michigan Republicans back then, there was no one left to push back against Whitmer. There was no conductor for their discontent. So Whitmer won re-election easily, but if you talk to any conservative, any real conservative outside of Lansing, who's not some kind of consultant, who doesn't do this for a living, they just care about their community, you knew that those results were not a reflection of reality. So it was nice to see Whitmer lose. It's nice to see her walled in. The Democrats do not hold all the gavels, and so that's probably going to save you some money because next time they try to raise taxes, it won't be easy. Next time they try to pass a crazy budget, those originate in the House. It won't be easy. Republicans have a moment if they can use it, and now it's going to be our job to hold them to account that they do use it. You can have power or you can use power. If Republicans don't use it, there's no point in getting it. Just like anything else in life, if you don't use it, you lose it. It was extra special, though, when Whitmer's BFF, Curtis Hertel Jr., Hertel's dad actually gave Whitmer her first job in politics back when he was House Speaker. Whitmer's helped him out, elevated him to chief of staff when he termed out of the legislature. And now Whitmer was trying to launch Hertel to Congress, to Washington, D.C., and he lost. And so between the two, the takeaway could not be any more clear. Whitmer is no longer all-powerful. Not in Lansing, not in Michigan, not nationwide, not with that paper-thin memoir. Her coattails weren't even long enough to get a family friend elected to a Lansing area seat. Assuming the Republicans don't cuck for Whitmer, this is the end of the line of her career in Michigan. By the grace of God, Harris lost, or it would have been the end of her career on the national stage. Now, Whitmer is a smart woman. She seems to have anticipated this. In recent months, she seems to have rebranded as almost, she's less of a governor these days and more of a pro-abortion influencer to the very online woman. So don't take this the wrong way, Michigan. This will be hard news to swallow. But Big Gretch just isn't that into you. Her speaking role at the World Economic Forum conference in Davos, that was just a little whisper. That she had bigger britches than can be accommodated in Michigan. But that Dorito communion video, that was a yell. Whitmer was not playing to any base that lives in Michigan. She was looking past us to the next thing. It showed that Whitmer was here solely for the wine mom who's 50 years old and gets thirsty at 5:01 p.m. But when they went to the Whitmer bag of tricks, it didn't work. No matter how many times they cackle abortion, no one listens. No matter how loudly they warn that literally Hitler is going to be the end of our democracy, nobody cares. Gretchen Whitmer's glassy eyes are the future if Democrats don't learn the lessons of 2024. So yeah, you can build a party around wine moms, sure. But who's going to be the designated driver on election day?